The late March sky draped a heavy gray shroud over Greenhaven Cemetery, mirroring the grief etched on the faces gathered around the small white coffin. 6-year-old Sophie Taylor's funeral had drawn nearly the entire town of Riverist, their sorrow thick in the crisp spring air. Robert Taylor stood motionless beside his daughter's casket, a hollow shell of the man he had been just days before. The ceremony was nearing its end when the commotion began. A powerful German shepherd burst through the parted crowd, ignoring sharp commands from his uniformed handler. The police K-9, Dakota, charged toward the coffin with unwavering purpose, drawing startled gasps from the mourners. In one fluid motion, the shepherd leapt atop the small white casket, his body rigid, trembling, yet resolute. "Get that dog off of her," someone shouted, as the handler approached with an apologetic expression, leash in hand. But when he reached for Dakota, the dog bared his teeth, a behavior he had never displayed toward his handler before. At the edge of the gathering, a figure clad in worn leather stood still, observing. His face was partially obscured by a graying beard and dark sunglasses, but Jake Morgan's military-trained eyes narrowed as he studied the dog's behavior. Something wasn't right. Dakota wasn't just mourning. He was alerting, and Jake knew exactly what that meant. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. Sophie Taylor had always been a bright spark in the small town of Riverist. At just 6 years old, she possessed a wisdom and kindness that extended far beyond her years. With her honey blonde hair often tied in mismatched pigtails and eyes that flickered between blue and gray, depending on her mood, she had a way of making people feel special. But beneath her sunny exterior lay a daily battle, one she had fought. Since the age of 3, when the same car accident that took her mother's life left her with a traumatic brain injury, Sophie had epilepsy. The seizures came without warning, stealing moments of her childhood, yet she faced them with an unwavering spirit, especially when it came to animals. "Animals don't look at you funny when you fall," she once told her father. "They just wait for you to get back up." Robert Taylor had been a respected veterinarian before tragedy shattered his world. At 42, the silver streaks in his dark hair and the deep lines on his face told the story of a man who had aged decades in just a few years. After losing his wife, Jennifer, Robert shut down his practice, unable to endure the constant reminders of what they had built together. Instead, he devoted himself entirely to Sophie, working from home as a medical transcriptionist between doctor visits and hospital stays. The mounting medical bills weighed heavily on him, but nothing compared to the ever-present fear that one day a seizure might take his daughter too. His hands, once steady enough for delicate surgeries, often trembled now when he helped Sophie with her medication. "One day at a time," he whispered to himself each morning, his wife's favorite saying becoming his desperate mantra. Then came Dakota, a broken soul in need of saving. The German Shepherd puppy had been found with fractured ribs and cigarette burns, the evidence of cruelty undeniable. And then there was Jake Morgan, a man whose rough exterior concealed unexpected depths. His leather jacket, covered in motorcycle club patches, and the faded military tattoos on his arms made him an intimidating figure. Few in Riverist knew that the gruff biker was actually Jennifer Taylor's estranged brother, a former Army combat medic whose self-destructive spiral after service had cost him his family. Even fewer knew about the incident that sent him to prison, assaulting Dr. Mark Peterson after the physician refused emergency treatment to a child from the wrong side of town. The day that changed everything dawned crisp and clear, exactly 3 years after Jennifer's death. Robert had dreaded the anniversary, watching Sophie grow quieter as it approached. Their tradition had been to visit Jennifer's favorite hiking trail in the Appalachian foothills, where wildflowers painted the land in her favorite colors. This year, Sophie insisted on bringing a small bouquet of dandelions, because they're strong enough to grow anywhere, she explained. Just like Mommy said I am. They parked at the familiar trailhead, Robert double-checking Sophie's medical bag, extra medication, emergency contact information, and the specialized, cushioned helmet she wore for protection against unexpected falls. The path wound gently through oak and hickory trees just beginning to unfurl their spring leaves. Sophie skipped ahead, never quite out of Robert's sight. They reached the overlook where Jennifer once loved to photograph sunsets, and Robert helped Sophie arrange her dandelions in a small cairn of stones. "Daddy, did you hear that?" Sophie suddenly asked, tilting her head. Robert listened, but heard only the rustling leaves and distant bird song. But Sophie was already moving, drawn toward something unseen. Robert hurried after her, calling for her to slow down. When he caught up, he found his daughter kneeling beside a fallen log, whispering in the gentle voice she reserved for frightened creatures. "It's okay," she soothed. "We won't hurt you." At first, Robert saw nothing. Then a slight movement. Wedged beneath the rotting wood was a German shepherd puppy, no more than 3 months old. Its fur was matted with mud and blood, and one hind leg was twisted at an unnatural angle. Most disturbing of all were the circular burns where the fur had been scorched away, exposing raw skin. Robert's stomach clenched, deliberate, cruel. "Daddy, he's hurt bad," Sophie said, tears welling in her eyes. "Like I was after the accident. We have to help him." Robert's instincts as a veterinarian took over. Kneeling beside the pup, he assessed the damage: severely dehydrated, multiple injuries, a broken creature in need of saving. But miraculously, he was still alive. Using his jacket as a makeshift carrier, Robert gently wrapped the trembling animal. The dog didn't struggle or snap. Instead, he fixed Sophie with an intense gaze, something almost like recognition flickering in his eyes. "He knows we're helping him," Sophie whispered with absolute certainty. "I'm going to name him Dakota. It means friend in Native American." Robert started to correct her, then stopped himself. "Dakota is perfect." With the nearest animal hospital closed for renovations, Robert drove instead to Blue Ridge Animal Sanctuary. He had donated his veterinary equipment there after closing. His practice and knew its director, Dr. Sarah Williams, would help without hesitation. Nestled against the foothills, the sanctuary provided refuge for everything from abandoned farm animals to injured wildlife. Sarah met them at the entrance, her experienced gaze sweeping over the situation. "Bring him straight back," she instructed, leading them through the main building to a familiar examination room, one stocked with instruments Robert himself had once used. Multiple fractures, dehydration, malnourishment, and these burns. Sarah's voice hardened as she gently examined Dakota. "Someone did this deliberately. We'll need to report it." As Sarah prepared for x-rays, Sophie sat beside the eye examination table, speaking softly to Dakota. Despite Robert's concerns about hygiene and possible aggression, the puppy's eyes never left the little girl. When Sarah attempted to separate them, Dakota whimpered until Sophie was allowed to remain in sight. "I've never seen anything quite like this bond," Sarah murmured, watching them. "Especially with a dog that's been abused. They usually don't trust humans at all." Dakota required surgery for his broken leg, antibiotics for infection, and extensive care for his burns. When Sarah gently suggested leaving him at the sanctuary, Sophie's small hands clenched into determined fists. "He needs me," she insisted, "and I need him too." Robert recognized that expression. It was Jennifer's look, the one that signaled an immovable decision. He arranged to cover Dakota's medical expenses in installments, and committed to bringing Sophie for daily visits. Those visits quickly became the highlight of her life. She sat by Dakota's kennel, reading books aloud while he healed, smuggling in treats despite the sanctuary's strict dietary rules. Then something changed. At first, Robert barely noticed. A day without a seizure, then 3, then a full week. Sophie's neurologist was cautiously optimistic. Emotional support animals sometimes had a stabilizing effect. But what happened next astonished everyone. 3 weeks into Dakota's recovery, Sophie sat by his kennel when her body suddenly stiffened, the telltale sign of an oncoming seizure. Before Robert could reach her, Dakota was already reacting. Despite his healing leg, he pressed against the kennel door until it popped open, then positioned himself against Sophie, barking sharply to alert Robert. The seizure that followed was milder than usual, and Sophie recovered more quickly than ever before. Reviewing the sanctuary's security footage later, Sarah pointed to the timestamp. Look, he started reacting almost 2 minutes before Sophie showed symptoms. Further observation confirmed it wasn't a coincidence. Dakota displayed consistent alerting behaviors before each seizure. Restlessness, specific vocalizations, physical positioning that allowed Sophie to safely lie down before an episode struck. Without formal training, he had become something extraordinary, an early warning system giving Sophie precious minutes to prepare. There are specialized programs for epilepsy service dogs, Sarah explained one evening. But they cost over $20,000 with years-long waiting lists. What you found here is incredible. As Dakota healed, his bond with Sophie only deepened. The puppy who should have feared humans instead developed an uncanny attunement to Sophie's needs. For her part, Sophie flourished. She took charge of his physical therapy, helping him regain strength. He was broken, she told Robert seriously one day, and now he's getting better, just like me. Robert watched them together, feeling something he couldn't quite name, a connection that felt more like fate than coincidence. When Dakota was finally cleared for adoption, there was no question. He would go home with Sophie. 6 months later, the call came. Chief Michael Wilson of the Rivercrest Police Department explained that their K-9 unit had been observing Dakota during Sophie's therapy sessions at the rehabilitation center where the department volunteered. The dog's intelligence and natural alerting abilities had impressed their trainer so much that they had a proposition. "We're not trying to take him away from your daughter," Chief Wilson assured Robert, sitting in their modest living room. Dakota lay protectively at Sophie's feet, his eyes tracking the unfamiliar visitor. "What we're proposing is a partnership. Dakota would receive professional training to enhance his skills and work part-time with the department. The rest of the time, he'd stay with Sophie." Robert hesitated. "I don't understand. He's a rescue with a traumatic history. Don't you usually start with purpose-bred puppies?" Officer James Lowry, the department's K-9 trainer, nodded. "Typically, yes, but Dakota has demonstrated extraordinary qualities. His ability to detect Sophie's seizures without training suggests an exceptional sensitivity. We believe he'd excel in detection work, especially in search and rescue, or medical alert scenarios." The financial aspects were compelling. The department would cover all of Dakota's veterinary expenses, provide professional training worth thousands of dollars, and offer a monthly stipend to help with Sophie's medical bills. In return, Dakota would work 20 hours a week with the K-9 unit after completing his training. "What about Sophie?" Robert asked, protective instincts flaring. "Her seizures can happen any time." "We've thought about that," Wilson replied. "Dr. Williams at the sanctuary has agreed to help design a training schedule that accommodates Sophie's school hours and medical needs. Dakota would primarily work while she's in school, and we'd ensure he's with her during high-risk times." Sophie, who had been quietly listening, suddenly spoke up. "Would he get a police badge?" she asked. "And one of those special vests?" Officer Lowry smiled and crouched to her level. "He would. He'd be an official police K-9 with his own badge number, and you could attend his graduation ceremony." Sophie's face lit up, but then uncertainty clouded her expression. "But what if I have a big seizure and he's working? What if I need him and he's not there?" It was the question Robert had been afraid to voice. Dakota had become her guardian, often alerting before an episode, positioning himself to protect her. The thought of him being absent during a crisis sent a chill through Robert's heart. But the reality was, Sophie's medical bills were mounting. Their best hope, a specialized pediatric neurologist in the neighboring county, didn't accept their insurance. The financial support from Isaac, the K-9 program, could make that care possible. After careful discussion, they agreed to a trial period. 3 mornings a week while Sophie was at school, Dakota trained with Officer Lowry. He proved to be an exceptional student, mastering skills in record time. The trainers marveled at his ability to seamlessly switch between professional work and his role as Sophie's protector. What had started as an unlikely rescue had become something much greater. During training sessions, Dakota displayed remarkable focus and discipline, but the moment he reunited with Sophie, his demeanor softened into gentle attentiveness. "He understands the difference between his jobs," Officer Lowry observed, watching Dakota seamlessly switch from a highly trained police dog to a devoted companion. "It's like he has two distinct sides, each perfectly suited to its purpose." Yet, as Dakota advanced in his training, Sophie's condition took a troubling turn. The seizures that had diminished after Dakota entered her life began to return. Longer, more severe, and increasingly resistant to medication. Robert found himself making frantic late-night drives to the emergency room, gripping Sophie's small hand, as doctors administered rescue medications to stop seizures that refused to end on their own. "We need to adjust her treatment plan," Dr. Henderson, her longtime neurologist, explained after another hospital visit. "The EEG shows increased activity in the temporal lobe. I'd like to refer her to Dr. Eliza Montgomery at Children's Memorial. She specializes in complex pediatric epilepsy cases." Robert's stomach clenched as he read the referral paperwork. Children's Memorial was 3 hours away. And worse, Dr. Montgomery was out of network for their insurance. The initial consultation alone would cost more than a month's salary. "Is there another option?" Robert asked, hating the desperation in his voice. Dr. Henderson sighed, sympathy in his eyes. "For routine epilepsy management, yes, but Sophie's case is becoming increasingly complex. Dr. Montgomery pioneered a diagnostic protocol specifically for children like her, where standard treatments fail. I wouldn't suggest it if I didn't believe it was necessary." That night, after Sophie had fallen asleep with Dakota vigilant at her bedside, Robert sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by bills, insurance statements, and denial letters. The house he and Jennifer had once filled with love and hope now felt like it was closing in on him. The roof needed repairs, the heating system was failing, and now Sophie needed specialized medical care they couldn't afford. The K-9 program stipend helped, but it wasn't nearly enough. In desperation, Robert called Sarah Williams at the sanctuary, asking if Dakota could take on more training, hours for additional compensation. Sarah listened carefully, then made a suggestion that caught Robert off guard. "The K-9 graduation ceremony is next month," she said. "It's a big community event. Local businesses donate generously to the program. If you're open to it, I could talk to Chief Wilson about highlighting Sophie and Dakota's story. A fundraiser tied to the ceremony might generate enough support for Sophie's treatment." The idea of making Sophie's medical struggles public unsettled Robert. Jennifer had always been fiercely protective of her privacy, but as he glanced at the growing pile of medical bills, he saw no alternative. With a heavy heart, he agreed. The weeks leading up to Dakota's graduation were a whirlwind of preparation. Local news outlets picked up the story of the abused rescue dog who had become both a devoted service animal to a child with epilepsy and a promising police K-9. Sophie, brimming with pride, gave an interview for the school newspaper, explaining how Dakota could smell seizures before they happened. Officer Lowry arranged for Sophie to present Dakota with his official K-9 vest during the ceremony, an honor that had her practicing her speech every night before bed. The day of the ceremony dawned bright and clear. The police department's training field had been transformed with rows of folding chairs, a podium draped in an American flag, and a display table showcasing photos of the graduating K-9 teams. Sophie wore her favorite blue dress, embroidered with butterflies, her hair carefully braided by Mrs. Chan from next door. Dakota, freshly groomed, his coat gleaming in the sunlight, performed final practice runs with Officer Lowry, responding with flawless precision. The ceremony opened with the chief's welcome address, followed by demonstrations of each graduating dog's specialized skills. When Dakota's turn came, he executed every command with sharp focus, locating hidden items, responding to Lowry's signals with seamless coordination. Applause rippled through the audience. In the front row, Robert, sat beside Sophie, his chest tight with emotion, pride in Dakota's achievements, but also deep uncertainty. Because after the demonstrations, the real test would begin, the fundraiser that could change Sophie's future. As the ceremony concluded, Officer Lowry called Sophie forward. She walked carefully, carrying the specially sized K9 vest embroidered with Dakota alongside the police insignia. The audience fell silent as the small girl solemnly presented the vest to Officer Lowry, who helped her place it on Dakota. The shepherd stood perfectly still, his posture radiating dignity despite the flashing cameras and murmuring crowd. And now, Officer Lowry announced, Dakota would like to demonstrate his most important skill, the one that inspired our department to welcome him into our K9 program. This was the moment they had planned. Dakota would perform a seizure alert demonstration with a training volunteer, showcasing the ability that made him exceptional. But before the volunteer could step forward, Dakota suddenly stiffened, his entire focus locking onto Sophie with an intensity Robert recognized instantly. "Sophie," Robert called, already rising from his seat. But it was too late. In front of hundreds of witnesses, Sophie's body went rigid. Her eyes rolled back as she collapsed onto the grassy field. Before anyone could react, Dakota broke formation, sprinting to her side. He positioned himself beneath her falling body, breaking her impact, and barked sharply, his specific alert for her most severe seizures. The demonstration had become horrifyingly real. Chaos erupted. Officer Lowry radioed for paramedics as a precaution. Robert fumbled with the emergency medication, his hands shaking as he administered it. Dakota refused to move, his body pressed against Sophie's, his alert barks continuing even as medical personnel arrived. The seizure did not stop. Her lips tinged blue. "We need to transport her now," the lead paramedic decided, moving with swift efficiency. Rivercrest General is 7 minutes out. As they loaded Sophie into the ambulance, Dakota attempted to follow, straining against Officer Lowry's grip. His distress was palpable, his frantic barks piercing through the commotion. Robert made a split-second decision. "Let him come," he told Officer Lowry, already climbing into the ambulance. "She needs him." A paramedic hesitated, but seeing Dakota's controlled, trained presence, she nodded. The ceremonial K9 vest was hastily removed, and Dakota leaped into the ambulance, positioning himself as close to Sophie as the paramedics. Aloud, the sirens wailed as Sophie's seizure stretched beyond the 15-minute mark, entering status epilepticus, a life-threatening state. Dakota remained vigilant, his body tense yet steady. At one point, he made eye contact with Robert, and in that gaze, Robert saw his own fear mirrored. At the hospital, the emergency team was already waiting. Dr. Mark Peterson, the attending physician, barely glanced at Dakota. "No dogs in the ED," he said firmly, pointing to the waiting area. Robert started to protest, but a nurse intervened. "Dr. Peterson, he's her seizure alert dog. We've been instructed to make accommodations for service animals." With visible reluctance, Peterson relented. "Fine, but keep him on the far side of the room." As the team worked to stabilize Sophie, Robert watched Dakota intently. The shepherd's behavior had shifted, his posture no longer tense but watchful, his eyes never leaving Sophie's face. None of them realized at that moment that this seizure marked the beginning of the most harrowing chapter of their journey, one that would test the limits of medicine, reveal unexpected connections, and prove the extraordinary bond between a broken girl and the dog who refused to let her go. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows over Sophie's pale face as Dr. Peterson moved with clinical efficiency, issuing orders while barely acknowledging Robert's presence. 6 hours after admission, the seizure had finally stopped. But Sophie remained unconscious. "We've administered 3 rounds of anti-seizure medications," Peterson explained, flipping through her chart. "The seizure has stopped, but she's not regaining consciousness at the expected rate. We need an EEG to assess brain activity and check for potential damage." Robert stood at Sophie's bedside, his hand resting near hers, the other stroking Dakota's head. The shepherd had been a silent guardian through the chaos, his behavior impeccable. "This isn't her first serious seizure," Robert said. "Her recovery time varies, but she usually starts responding within a few hours." Dr. Peterson's expression remained impassive. "Mr. Taylor, status epilepticus, seizures lasting over 30 minutes, can cause significant neurological damage. Your daughter seized for nearly 45 minutes. We need to prepare for the possibility that this episode was different." The bluntness of his words hit Robert like a physical blow. "I want Dr. Henderson consulted," he said, clinging to familiarity. "Dr. Henderson is out of town at a conference." Peterson closed Sophie's chart. "I've reviewed her records. I'm fully capable of managing her care." Without another word, he turned to leave. Robert wasn't the only one watching him. Dakota's head lifted, his sharp eyes tracking Peterson as he exited the room. His posture had shifted, not aggressive but alert, the same awareness he showed when detecting something off. The hours blurred together in hushed conversations outside the room, rapid tests, and the ceaseless beeping of monitors. A kind nurse brought water for Dakota and arranged a small bed beside Sophie's. He never left her side. Robert dozed fitfully in the stiff hospital chair, only to jolt awake at Dakota's soft whine. The shepherd had risen, staring intently at Sophie. Robert's stomach clenched. He checked the monitors. No change. But then he saw it. Her color was wrong, a faint grayish tinge. "Nurse!" Robert pressed the call button frantically. "Something's wrong." The night nurse rushed in, checked Sophie's vitals, then immediately paged the on-call physician. The room flooded with medical personnel. The monitor alarms blared in discordant chorus. "Respiratory arrest," someone called out. "Starting resuscitation protocol." Robert was shoved to the wall. Dakota pressed against his side as the team worked in a blur of motion. They placed a breathing tube, connecting it to a ventilator. The machine took over the rhythm of her breathing. A doctor Robert didn't recognize shone a light into Sophie's unresponsive eyes. "Page Dr. Peterson," he instructed. 20 agonizing minutes later, Peterson arrived, his scrubs fresh despite the late hour. He reviewed the new test results in hushed tones before approaching Robert. "Mr. Taylor," Peterson said, his voice emotionless, "your daughter's condition has deteriorated. The EEG shows minimal brain activity, and she now requires ventilator support. These findings, combined with her failure to respond, indicate severe neurological compromise." Robert's breath caught in his throat. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that the prolonged seizure appears to have caused catastrophic brain damage." Peterson's voice remained detached. "We will continue supportive care, but you should prepare for the possibility that she won't recover meaningful neurological function." The words landed like a death sentence. "There must be something else we can do," Robert pleaded. "A specialist? A treatment we haven't tried?" Peterson exhaled sharply, glancing at his watch. "Mr. Taylor, I understand this is difficult to accept, but given the severity of the damage, transfer to a specialized facility would be futile. The kindest thing now is to focus on—" He didn't finish, because at that moment, Dakota moved. He rose from his spot beside Sophie's bed, took a step forward and let out a single low growl, so soft it was nearly inaudible. But it wasn't aggression. It was something else, something Robert couldn't quite explain. "We should begin comfort measures and consider end-of-life decisions." Robert stared at the doctor, his mind refusing to accept the words. "She's 6 years old," he said, his voice hollow. 6. You can't just tell me to give up on her." "I'm not asking you to give up," Peterson replied, a flicker of impatience in his tone. "I'm giving you a medical assessment based on 30 years of experience. Your daughter has suffered catastrophic neurological injury. Modern medicine has its—" Dakota, sensing the tension, paced between Sophie's bed and the door, whining softly, in a way Robert recognized from the dog's seizure alerts. That familiar pattern cut through his fog of grief, grounding him in a sudden surge of resolve. "I want a second opinion," he said, his voice firm. "And I want her transferred to Children's Memorial under Dr. Montgomery. She specializes in complex pediatric epilepsy cases. Peterson's expression darkened. Mr. Taylor, that's not a reasonable request. First, Children's Memorial is nearly 3 hours away. Your daughter isn't stable enough for transport. Second, their specialized care would be wasted on a case with such a poor prognosis. Third, as I understand it, your insurance doesn't cover treatment there. I don't care about the insurance, Robert shot back. We'll figure that out. Sophie deserves every chance. Even if I approve the transfer, which I won't, their ethics board would likely refuse the case. They won't allocate resources to a patient with such minimal chances of recovery. The patronizing tone ignited a spark of fury beneath Robert's grief. You don't know my daughter, he said, his voice tight with emotion. She's fought through every obstacle since the accident. You can't just write her off after one exam. Peterson checked his watch, making no effort to hide his impatience. I'll order another EEG in the morning, but I don't expect different results. Try to get some rest, Mr. Taylor. The nurse will provide a cot. The moment Peterson left, the weight of helplessness crashed over Robert. He sank into the chair beside Sophie's bed, Dakota pressing his head against his knee. The shepherd's deep brown eyes held an understanding that shattered Robert's fragile composure. His breath hitched, and for the first time he let himself weep, one hand clutching Sophie's limp fingers, the other buried in Dakota's fur. Morning brought no miracles. The follow-up EEG confirmed Peterson's prognosis: minimal brain activity, insufficient to sustain life without support. Doctors came and went, their expressions shifting from professional concern to veiled pity. By noon, Officer Lowry arrived, carrying fresh clothes for Robert and food for Dakota. The K-9 trainer surveyed Sophie's motionless form before resting. A reassuring hand on Robert's shoulder. The whole department's pulling for her, he said simply. Chief Wilson wants to know if there's anything we can do. Fundraising, transportation, whatever you need. Robert hesitated, then explained Peterson's refusal to consider further treatment, his outright dismissal of any alternative options. As he spoke, he noticed Lowry's expression shift, recognition flickering in his eyes at the mention of Peterson's name. Peterson? Lowry repeated, thoughtful. Tall guy, maybe 60, silver hair. Always looks like he just smelled something bad. Robert nodded, surprised by the accurate description. Thought so, Lowry muttered, voice lowering. There's history there. About 5 years back, Jake Morgan, the vet who runs the outreach program, he put Peterson in the hospital parking lot. Got 18 months for it. Rumor was Peterson turned away a kid from the trailer park. Insurance issues, something like that. Kid ended up with permanent complications. Jake lost it when he found out. Robert absorbed the information uneasily. Before he could respond, the door opened again, admitting a young neurologist. I'm Dr. Amara Singh, she introduced herself. I was asked to consult on Sophie's case by hospital administration. She reviewed the test results carefully, performing a meticulous examination, watching for subtle reflexes, testing pupil responses, observing details Peterson had overlooked. Dakota, ever perceptive, watched her closely. Unlike with Peterson, the shepherd remained calm, less agitated. Mr. Taylor, Dr. Singh finally said, meeting his gaze, I'd like to order additional testing. A more comprehensive EEG with provocation protocols plus specific autonomic response measurements. Dr. Peterson focused on cortical activity, but there are deeper brain functions we should evaluate before making any definitive prognosis. For the first time in 24 hours, Robert felt a flicker of hope. Will Peterson approve these tests? He asked cautiously. He seemed convinced. Further intervention was pointless. Dr. Singh's expression remained neutral, but her eyes conveyed understanding. As a consulting neurologist, I don't need his approval. I've already spoken with the chief of medicine. The tests consumed most of the afternoon. Robert stayed at Sophie's bedside, drawing strength from Dakota's steady presence and Lowry's quiet support. As evening fell, Dr. Singh returned, her expression serious, but not hopeless. The additional tests show something interesting, she said, pulling up readouts on her tablet. Minimal typical cortical activity, which is what Dr. Peterson focused on. However, we're seeing preservation of autonomic functions and some subcortical responses. That suggests the damage may be less catastrophic than initially assessed. It's possible she's in a profound postictal state rather than suffering irreversible damage. Robert clung to every word. What does that mean for Sophie? It means we shouldn't rush to pessimistic conclusions, Dr. Singh said carefully. I recommend continuing supportive care and considering a transfer to a pediatric neurology center once she's stable. Dr. Montgomery at Children's Memorial would be ideal. Hope sparked, but reality quickly stamped it out. Peterson said she wasn't stable enough for transfer. And insurance. Dr. Singh chose her words deliberately. I believe she could be safely transported with proper medical support. As for insurance, that's outside my purview, but the hospital social worker might be able to discuss options. Before Robert could respond, the door swung open. Peterson. His expression was tight, his displeasure evident. I wasn't informed about additional testing, he said curtly, scanning Dr. Singh's tablet. The chief of medicine approved the consult, she replied evenly. Given the patient's age and the complexity of her case, a second neurological opinion was deemed appropriate. Peterson barely concealed his disdain. Interesting academic observations, but they don't change the fundamental prognosis. Mr. Taylor, I've spoken with the ethics committee. Given your daughter's condition and her poor prospects for recovery, we're recommending a transition to comfort care. The clinical euphemism struck Robert like a blow. Absolutely not, he said, voice steady despite the storm inside him. Dr. Singh just said there's a chance. She's offering false hope, Peterson interrupted, based on anomalous readings. I've been practicing medicine since before she was in school. Prolonging intervention only extends suffering. The argument was cut short by the sudden wail of alarms. Sophie's monitors screamed. Her heart rate plummeted. The ventilator blared. Dr. Singh moved instantly. She's crashing, she called, grabbing the crash cart. The next 45 minutes passed in a nightmarish blur. Doctors shouting, chest compressions, emergency medications. Robert stood frozen, back against the wall, one hand clenched in Dakota's fur as the sigh. Medical team fought. Then a silence more deafening than the alarms. Dr. Peterson turned. His face was unreadable. Time of death, 7:42 p.m. He made a notation in Sophie's chart, and just like that, she was gone. I'm very sorry, Mr. Taylor. We did everything we could, but her injuries were too severe. Robert stared blankly, unable to comprehend the words. Dr. Singh checked Sophie's pupils one last time before quietly confirming what had already been said. Dakota, who had remained unnervingly silent throughout the chaos, suddenly let out a low, keening whine. Not the alert pattern Robert had come to know, but a sound of pure grief that shattered something deep inside him. Would you like some time with her? A nurse asked gently, already reaching to disconnect the monitors. We can remove the breathing tube and make her comfortable for you to say goodbye. Robert nodded numbly, watching as they transformed his vibrant, resilient daughter into a still fragile form beneath the hospital blankets. When they finished, he stepped toward the bed, Dakota moving in silent lockstep beside him. He reached for Sophie's hand, still warm but terrifyingly motionless, and in that moment, with crushing finality, he understood. Despite every promise he had made to protect her since Jennifer's death, Sophie was gone. 3 days later, the town of Rivercrest gathered at Greenhaven Cemetery to say their final goodbyes. The March morning was gray but dry, muted sunlight, filtering through clouds as somber as the crowd. The cemetery stretched across a gentle hillside, overlooking the town, its carefully tended grounds dotted with ancient oaks that had borne witness to generations of grief. Robert stood beside his daughter's white coffin, barely recognizing the hollow-eyed man reflected in its polished surface. The past 72 hours had passed in a haze of paperwork, phone calls, and impossible decisions, each made with the detached precision of a man operating on autopilot. The funeral director had been kind but efficient, guiding him through choices no parent should ever face. the smallest casket in their catalog, a burial plot near Jennifer's grave. The wording of an obituary meant to encapsulate a 6-year-old's unfinished life. Pastor Williams, the elderly minister from the community church, stepped to the podium. His well-worn Bible lay open in his hands. He had baptized Sophie as an infant and presided over Jennifer's funeral 3 years earlier. Now he looked out over the 200 mourners gathered, many holding small stuffed animals or colorful pinwheels Sophie had loved, and began the service with a quiet prayer. "Friends, neighbors, family," Pastor Williams said, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd. "We come together today bearing a burden that feels too heavy to carry, the loss of a child. Sophie Elizabeth Taylor brightened our community for 6 short years with her courage, her kindness, and her extraordinary spirit." Robert barely moved, his gaze fixed on the small white coffin adorned with a spray of wildflowers gathered from the hiking trail where they had found Dakota. The dog had not been allowed at the service. The funeral director had gently but firmly cited policy, but he remained at the police K-9 facility under Officer Lowry's care, reportedly refusing to eat since Sophie's death. Pastor Williams continued. Then after a long pause, he announced, "Sophie's father would like to share some words of remembrance." Robert moved to the podium like a man walking underwater, every step requiring effort. He unfolded a slip of paper where he had attempted to distill his daughter's essence into words, then set it aside, unused. "My daughter," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, "loved to collect stones, not valuable ones, just ordinary pebbles that caught her attention. She'd find one on a walk or at the playground and insist it was special. Her room is filled with jars of these treasures, rocks that most of us would step over without noticing." He paused, drawing a breath. "After her mother died, Sophie told me something I will never forget. She said, 'Daddy, people are like my rocks. They all have something special, but sometimes you have to look really carefully to see it.'" A murmur rippled through the mourners. Quiet weeping filled the cemetery as Robert continued. "She saw something special in Dakota when he was broken and abandoned. She saw it in the classmates others overlooked. And she saw it in me, even when grief made me a shadow of the father. She deserved—" His voice threatened to break, but he pressed on. "Sophie fought against limitations from the day she was born. Her epilepsy never defined her. It was just a part of her story, not the whole book. She faced every challenge with a courage that humbled me daily. The world is dimmer without her light, but I know she would want us to keep looking, to find the special something in others, to keep collecting the overlooked treasures that make life meaningful." As Robert stepped back, Mrs. Chin, Sophie's favorite neighbor, began to sing "Amazing Grace." Her clear soprano voice carried across the hillside, and the gathered mourners joined in, their voices rising and falling with the wind rustling through the oak trees. Near the back of the crowd, partially obscured by a large headstone, stood a solitary figure. Jake Morgan had arrived as the service began, keeping a respectful distance. His leather jacket was zipped against the March chill, dark sunglasses concealing his eyes, but nothing could hide the rigid tension in his posture. Few mourners noticed him. Fewer still recognized him as the estranged brother of Jennifer Taylor, the Uncle Sophie had never known, as the hymn concluded. Pastor Williams invited those gathered to leave small tributes, stuffed animals, pinwheels, and hand-drawn cards from Sophie's classmates, in a special basket that would remain with the family. The solemn procession had just begun when a commotion at the cemetery entrance shattered the quiet. Officer James Lowry hurried up the gravel path, visibly distressed. Behind him, straining against a police-issue leash, was Dakota. The German Shepherd's intensity was unmistakable, even from a distance. "This isn't just a dog breaking training," Robert thought. Lowry reached him, lowering his voice. "I'm so sorry," he said urgently. "He broke through 2 secured doors at the facility. When I tried to stop him—" He gestured to a torn sleeve and a minor defensive wound on his forearm. "He's never shown aggression before. I thought maybe he needed to be here." Robert nodded, too exhausted to argue. The funeral director approached, concern etched across his face. ready to enforce the no animals policy. But something in Robert's expression stopped him. Just for a moment, Robert murmured. He was her protector. He deserves to say goodbye, too. Lowry hesitated, then slowly released the tension on Dakota's leash. The dog stilled, scanning the crowd before locking onto the coffin. Purposefully, deliberately, he moved forward. Mourners parted as if instinctively understanding. Reaching the casket, Dakota did something unexpected. Rather than sniffing or circling, he hoisted himself onto the coffin, front paws first, then, gracefully pulling his full weight atop it, settling into a sphinx-like position, Dakota surveyed the mourners with steady, intelligent eyes before fixing his gaze on Robert. "Sir," the funeral director began, stepping forward hesitantly. "I'm afraid we can't." "Wait." Robert's voice cut through the tension. Something about Dakota's posture gripped his full attention. This wasn't grief, not the restless pacing, or mournful whining from the hospital. This was something else. From his spot at the back, Jake Morgan removed his sunglasses, his sharp gaze narrowing. 2 decades as a combat medic had trained him to notice patterns others missed, and something about Dakota's posture triggered a memory he couldn't immediately place. "He's not grieving," Jake murmured more to himself than anyone. A nearby mourner glanced his way. "That's an alert posture." The funeral director shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Taylor, please. This is highly irregular. We need to proceed with the service." Robert barely heard him. Dakota had begun to whine, not a mournful sound. A rhythmic, deliberate pattern. Something was wrong. The sound wasn't grief. It was a pattern. A distinct rhythm Robert had come to recognize. A seizure alert. "He's alerting," Robert whispered. An impossible, terrible hope igniting in his chest. Why would Dakota alert if... The thought was shattered as Dakota barked again, sharp and urgent. The precise signal he used for Sophie's most severe seizures. The bark rang across the hillside, startling a flock of mourning doves from a nearby oak. "Get that animal under control," the funeral director snapped, his professional composure fracturing. "This is completely inappropriate." Officer Lowry moved in to retrieve Dakota, but the shepherd issued a low, unmistakable growl. A warning, a refusal, the stance of a dog certain his mission was not yet complete. "Something's wrong," Lowry murmured, hesitating. "I've never seen him act like this, not even during protection training." At the back of the gathering, Jake Morgan was already moving. His mind connected Dakota's behavior to memories from his military service. Medical detection dogs, trained to sense changes no human could perceive. "The dog's alerting," Jake called out, pushing through the stunned mourners. "Someone needs to check." "Sir, please return to your place," the funeral director interrupted, waving to cemetery staff for intervention. "We are in the middle of a service." Jake ignored him, stopping in front of Robert. Up close, the resemblance to Jennifer was unmistakable. The same set jaw, the same fire in his eyes. "You don't know me," Jake said, his gruff voice carrying urgency. "But I was a combat medic. I worked with medical dogs just like him. This isn't grief. He's trying to tell us something." Robert stared at the stranger, torn between desperate hope and protective rage. "My daughter is gone," he rasped. "The doctors confirmed it. What are you suggesting?" Dakota barked again, more insistent. His amber eyes never left Robert's. "I'm suggesting," Jake said steadily, "that dogs can sense what we can't. I've seen them detect changes in breathing, in heart rates, when all our medical equipment showed nothing." The funeral director stepped between them, exasperation etched in every line of his face. "Gentlemen, I must insist we proceed with the service. This is neither the time nor the place for—" "Open the coffin," Jake interrupted, his voice cutting through the murmurs of shock and disbelief. A ripple of gasps spread through the mourners. Pastor Williams stepped forward, his kind face creased with concern. "Son, I know grief takes many forms, but this isn't appropriate. Let's allow Sophie the dignity of rest." Jake turned to Robert, ignoring everyone else. I know how this sounds. I know what people are thinking. But that dog, he pointed to Dakota, still rigid atop the coffin, is trained to detect something we can't, and he hasn't stopped alerting. Robert stood frozen, torn between the crushing finality of loss and the fragile whisper of possibility. Dr. Singh's words from the hospital surfaced in his mind, about anomalous findings, about not rushing to conclusions. Robert, Lowry said quietly, Dakota has never given a false alert. Not once. Whatever he's sensing, it's real. To him, the funeral director exhaled sharply. I cannot permit the disturbance of a casket once it has been prepared for burial. It violates state regulations and professional protocol. Something shifted in Robert's expression. A familiar steel, the same defiance that had surfaced when doctors once suggested giving up on Sophie's epilepsy treatments. That's my daughter, he said simply. And if there's even the slightest chance, he couldn't finish the sentence. The words were too fragile to voice. A new voice cut through the tension. I support examining her condition. Dr. Amara Singh had arrived late to the service, now pushing through the bewildered mourners. As the consulting neurologist on Sophie's case, I can confirm there were anomalies in her final tests. They warrant verification. The funeral director hesitated, looking from Robert to Dr. Singh to Dakota, whose unwavering posture had not shifted. This is completely unprecedented, he protested weakly. So call the police, Robert countered, his voice steadying. Oh, wait. He gestured to Lowry and the uniformed officers in attendance. They're already here. Chief Wilson stepped forward. Under the circumstances, I believe we have reasonable cause to request an emergency medical evaluation. His tone left no room for argument. I'll take full responsibility. The next moments unfolded in a surreal blur. The funeral director reluctantly stepped aside. Lowry radioed for emergency medical services. Jake briefed Dr. Singh on what he had seen. Dakota remained atop the coffin, his alerting unwavering. The nearest ambulance is 8 minutes out, Lowry reported, then shook his head. We can't. Wait. Do it, Chief Wilson ordered. With deliberate care, Lowry and another officer unlatched the casket. Dakota shifted slightly, maintaining contact with the lid as they lifted it open. Silence fell over the cemetery. Sophie lay nestled in white satin, peaceful, as if simply sleeping. Her favorite blue dress with butterfly embroidery draped over her small frame. To the untrained eye, nothing was amiss, which made Dakota's continued alerting all the more impossible to ignore. Jake stepped forward, his medical instincts overriding the absurdity of the moment. He pressed 2 fingers to Sophie's neck, his brow furrowing in concentration. No one breathed. Then Jake looked up. His face had changed. I have a pulse, he announced. His voice was steady, absolute. Faint, maybe 10 or 12 beats per minute. But it's there. Gasps and cries rippled through the crowd. Dr. Singh moved swiftly, confirming the finding with her own examination. A moment later, she checked Sophie's pupils with a penlight from her purse. Minimal response, she reported, but present. This is consistent with profound cataleptic state, not death. Robert swayed, gripping the casket for support. She's alive, he whispered, afraid to believe it. But the hospital, the death certificate. Catalepsy is rare, Dr. Singh explained rapidly, already initiating life support measures. Vital signs can be suppressed below detectable levels without specialized tests. It's been mistaken for death before. Dakota had jumped down from the coffin, positioning himself at Sophie's side, his posture shifting from urgency to the steady watchfulness he displayed during her seizures. It all made sense now. He hadn't been grieving. He had been alerting. In the distance, sirens cut through the hushed cemetery. Chief Wilson was already on the radio, calling for immediate airlift to Children's Memorial Hospital. The funeral had transformed into a medical rescue. Mourners stood motionless, unwilling to leave, waiting to know Sophie's fate. Through it all, Jake remained at Sophie's side, monitoring her vitals with the calm efficiency of a man accustomed to extraordinary situations. When he finally looked, Up at Robert, the resemblance between them was undeniable. The same fire, the same refusal to accept what the world deemed inevitable. "You're Jennifer's brother," Robert said hoarsely, recognition dawning through the storm of emotion. Jake nodded once. His focus never left Sophie. Robert barely registered Jake's words, his focus locked on Sophie. "We'll have time for that later," Jake said firmly. "Right now, your daughter needs advanced medical care immediately. The cataleptic state may have protected her brain from oxygen deprivation, but she needs specialists." As the paramedics arrived and began transferring Sophie to the ambulance, Dakota remained unwavering at her side, refusing to move even as they loaded her inside. This time, Officer Lowry didn't try to restrain him. "He goes with her," Robert said. No one argued. Standing on the hillside, the mourners remained motionless, struggling to process what they had just witnessed. A funeral had become a rescue. Grief had transformed into tentative hope. The very understanding of death itself had been shaken. Pastor Williams finally broke the stunned silence, his weathered face a mix of shock and quiet reverence. "In all my years," he murmured, "I've never seen anything like this. This isn't just a medical anomaly. It's a testament to the bond between a child and her protector." He exhaled, gathering himself. "Perhaps," he added thoughtfully, "we should transform this gathering from a funeral into a prayer circle for Sophie's recovery." As the mourners slowly reoriented around this new purpose, Jake Morgan felt a presence at his side. "Chief Wilson, you're aware there's a warrant out for your arrest," Wilson said quietly. It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of parole violation, the Peterson incident. Jake nodded once, no regret in his expression. "I know, but I couldn't stay away from my niece's funeral." Wilson studied him for a long moment before speaking. "Well," he said finally, "I seem to have misplaced my handcuffs today. Strange coincidence." A beat of silence passed before he added, "And I expect the paperwork processing your arrest might take unusually long, maybe long enough for a judge to consider the circumstances." He glanced toward the departing ambulance. "You should go to the hospital. Your family needs you." Then he turned and walked away. Jake remained, still on the hillside, watching the ambulance disappear around the bend. After 15 years of self-imposed exile, after prison, regret, and aimless wandering, a German shepherd's relentless devotion had just altered the course of not only Sophie's life, but maybe his own. The sirens of the emergency vehicles cut through Rivercrest's quiet streets. Townspeople stopped in their tracks, watching as the procession sped past. Inside the lead ambulance, paramedics worked urgently to stabilize Sophie's fragile vitals. Robert knelt beside the gurney, one hand wrapped around his daughter's small fingers, the other resting on Dakota's head. The German shepherd remained unnaturally still, amber eyes locked onto Sophie with unwavering focus. "BP's dropping again," a paramedic called out. "Oxygen saturation at 83%. Robert gripped Dakota's fur. Dr. Singh, who had accompanied them from the cemetery, monitored Sophie's pupils with clinical precision. "Her condition is deteriorating," she said quietly. "The cataleptic state may have initially preserved her brain function, but she's been without proper medical support for nearly 3 days. We need to get her to advanced care immediately." The ambulance radio crackled. "Emergency helicopter is delayed due to mechanical issues. Backup air transport is 20 minutes out, minimum." Dr. Singh's expression tightened. "She doesn't have 20 minutes. Children's Memorial is sending their specialized transport team," the dispatcher continued, "but estimated arrival is 35 minutes. Robert's breath caught. Dr. Singh met his eyes. "Rivercrest General is our only immediate option." Robert stiffened. His grip on Dakota tightened. "Not there." His voice was raw. "Not with Peterson." Dr. Singh's tone remained calm but firm. "I understand your concern, but your daughter's condition is critical. Rivercrest has the equipment to stabilize her. We don't have time for alternatives." The ambulance turned sharply onto Hospital Drive, its siren cutting off as they neared the emergency entrance. A medical team stood waiting, Among them, Robert spotted him. Dr. Peterson. Silver hair gleamed under the fluorescent ambulance bay lights. His expression was composed, professional, but Robert saw through it. As the doors swung open and the gurney was pulled out, Peterson stepped forward, assuming command with practiced authority. "Take her to Trauma 1, he ordered. "Full cardiac monitoring. Intubation trays ready, ventilator prepped." His gaze flicked to Dr. Singh. "I'll need a full briefing on your field assessment." Robert climbed out, Dakota at his side. The shepherd tensed. A low growl rumbled in his chest as Peterson stepped closer. Before anyone could react, Jake Morgan arrived, pulling off his motorcycle helmet as he strode forward. He didn't hesitate. "I suggest you step back from this case, Peterson," Jake said. His voice edged, with barely contained fury. "You've already made one catastrophic error with this child." Peterson barely spared him a glance. "Security, remove this individual, and get that dog out of my ER immediately." Two security guards hesitated. They knew exactly who Jake was, and what he was capable of. Before the situation could escalate, Chief Wilson stepped forward, badge in hand. "Dr. Peterson," Wilson said evenly, "given the extraordinary circumstances, I'm requesting that Dr. Singh maintain primary responsibility for Sophie Taylor's care, with consultation from the pediatric specialists at Children's Memorial." Peterson's jaw clenched. "This is my emergency department, Chief. I appreciate your concern, but medical decisions are made by physicians, not law enforcement." "Actually," another voice interjected, "in cases of potential medical negligence, administrative oversight can reassign care." All heads turned. Dr. Eleanor Weiners strode toward them, steel-gray hair pulled into a no-nonsense bun, wire-rimmed glasses perched on the bridge of her nose. Rivercrest General's Chief of Medicine. "Dr. Peterson," she said crisply, "please provide Dr. Singh with all necessary resources. Then report to my office, immediately." Peterson's face flushed. "With all due respect, Dr. Weiners, I've run this ER for 15 years. This situation is being driven by emotional reactions, not medical evidence." Dr. Weiners remained, moved. "The evidence is currently being rushed to Trauma 1, with vital signs that contradict your signed death certificate. I believe that warrants an administrative review." She turned to Robert. "Mr. Taylor, please proceed to the family waiting area. Dr. Singh will update you as soon as possible." As Peterson stalked away and the medical team rushed Sophie inside, Robert found himself guided to a small, private waiting room. Dakota pressed against his leg, his alerting behavior finally easing now that Sophie was receiving proper care. Jake hesitated in the doorway, uncertain. Robert looked up at him. For the first time, he really saw him. "You should stay," he said, simply. Jake nodded once and sat down across from him, hands clasped between his knees. The silence between them stretched, thick with unspoken history, with grief, with the fragile thread of possibility. After a long moment, Robert broke it. "Jennifer tried to find you," he said. "After Sophie was born. She wanted you to meet your niece." Jake's gaze stayed on the floor. "I wasn't in any shape to meet anyone back then, especially not a baby." A pause, then quieter. "When I got back from my last deployment, I wasn't right. Couldn't sleep, couldn't stop seeing things. The VA diagnosed PTSD, put me on pills that made everything worse." He exhaled, jaw tight. Jennifer deserved better than watching her brother self-destruct. Robert sat with that, fitting together puzzle pieces Jennifer had once shared in fragments. Then something clicked. "The incident with Peterson," he said slowly. "That wasn't random, was it?" Jake's hands tightened. "No. The clinic was quiet until a woman rushed in carrying her son, no older than 5, his small body burning with fever, each breath a struggle. Peterson was overseeing emergency intake that day. He barely looked up before turning them away, insisting they go to the county facility across town because their insurance didn't cover treatment at Riverest. I stepped in, Argued that the kid needed immediate care, but Peterson wouldn't budge. Security dragged me out when I refused to stand down. His expression darkened with regret. I followed him to the parking lot, lost control. By the time they pulled me off, his nose was broken, 2 ribs cracked. The boy, he suffered permanent lung damage, bacterial pneumonia left untreated too long. Before Robert could respond, the waiting room door swung open. Dr. Singh entered, her face grave as she settled across from them. "Sophie is critical but stable," she said. "We've initiated full life support and corrective measures for the metabolic imbalances caused by prolonged catalepsy. The pediatric transport team from Children's Memorial will be here in 15 minutes to oversee her transfer." "Will she recover?" Robert's voice barely rose above a whisper. Dr. Singh's professional composure softened. "Mr. Taylor, I need to be honest. While the cataleptic state protected her to an extent, Sophie suffered significant brain damage from oxygen deprivation. We won't fully understand the extent until a comprehensive neurological assessment at Children's Memorial. But you need to prepare for the possibility of severe impairment." The words hit Robert like a blow. Finding Sophie alive had felt like a miracle. Now, hope gave way to a crushing reality. She might survive, but not as the vibrant child he'd known. "What does that mean?" he forced out. Dr. Singh's voice remained steady. "It means that while her basic functions may remain intact, higher cognitive abilities, speech, movement, memory, learning, could be significantly compromised. Some patients in her situation require lifetime care." Dakota whined softly, sensing Robert's distress. The shepherd pressed closer, offering silent comfort as he always had. "There are also legal and ethical concerns," Dr. Singh continued, carefully. "The erroneous death certificate, premature funeral arrangements, these represent major deviations from protocol." Jake's expression darkened. "Negligence, you mean? Or worse?" Dr. Singh neither confirmed nor denied. "The hospital administration has launched a full review. For now, our priority is Sophie's care and safe transfer." As if on cue, a nurse appeared. "The pediatric transport team is here. They're preparing for immediate transfer." The next moments blurred, Sophie being moved onto a specialized transport gurney, the medical team coordinating medications and ventilator settings, emergency paperwork signed. Through it all, Dakota stayed close to Robert, eyes flicking toward the treatment room where Sophie lay. Then, as they prepared to move her to the helicopter, the nurse turned to Robert. "I'm sorry, but animals aren't permitted on air medical transports," she said, eyeing Dakota. "It's a strict safety regulation." Robert looked at the shepherd, his daughter's protector, the one who had sensed what no doctor had. The thought of leaving him behind felt wrong. "He's a trained K-9 officer and medical alert dog," Robert argued, his voice edged with desperation. "He detected her condition when everyone else failed." The nurse's expression was sympathetic, but firm. "I understand, Mr. Taylor, but we can't make exceptions. The cabin is too small. Weight distribution is critical." Chief Wilson, who had been coordinating with hospital security, stepped forward. "I'll arrange a police escort for you. And Dakota, you'll be at Children's Memorial less than 30 minutes behind them." As the team moved Sophie toward the helipad, Dakota suddenly pulled against Robert's grip, whining. A familiar sound. The same alert that had preceded Sophie's worst seizures. "Wait!" Robert's voice cut through the activity. "Something's wrong." The medical team hesitated. Dr. Singh immediately returned to Sophie's side, checking her monitors. "Her oxygen saturation is dropping," she announced, urgency sharpening her tone. "We need to adjust the ventilator settings before transport." The pediatric specialists moved quickly, recalibrating equipment, administering medication through Sophie's IV. Throughout it all, Dakota remained locked in place, only relaxing. When the monitor stabilized, the lead transport physician turned to Robert, genuine respect in his voice. "Your dog just prevented a major crisis in mid-air. That's incredible." As they prepared once again to move Sophie, the devastating reality pressed down on Robert. His daughter had been declared dead, prepared for burial while still alive. And now, even if she survived, she might never fully recover. The miracle of her return was overshadowed by what had been stolen. As the transport team wheeled Sophie to the waiting helicopter, Jake laid a hand on Robert's shoulder, a silent acknowledgement of shared grief and the long, uncertain road ahead. The pediatric intensive care unit at Children's Memorial ran with quiet precision, its efficiency belying the gravity of its work. 3 days had passed since Sophie's rescue and emergency transfer. Robert had barely left her bedside, dozing in the stiff recliner provided for parents, eating only when the nursing staff insisted. Dakota had been granted special access, an exception made in recognition of his role in saving Sophie and his continued ability to detect subtle changes in her condition. Dr. Eliza Montgomery, director of pediatric neurology and the specialist they had originally sought before the crisis, had taken charge of Sophie's case. In her early 50s, with prematurely silver hair and warm eyes behind stylish glasses, Montgomery radiated both brilliance and genuine compassion. "Mr. Taylor," she said, settling into the chair beside him, "I'd like to discuss Sophie's assessment results. We've conducted extensive neurological testing, including specialized EEGs and functional response evaluations." Robert braced himself, expecting confirmation of the worst. Jake stood nearby, ever present despite the complications his involvement posed. "Sophie's case is highly unusual," Montgomery continued, flipping through the thick file of test results. "Catalepsy is rare, especially in children. In reviewing her history, I believe this may be linked to her underlying epilepsy rather than solely the prolonged seizure." She paused before turning another page. "What's most remarkable is the pattern of neurological activity we're seeing. While some areas suffered damage from oxygen deprivation, others remain astonishingly intact, especially those governing consciousness, sensory processing, and emotional recognition." Robert leaned forward, afraid to hope. "What does that mean for her recovery?" Montgomery measured her response. "It means Sophie's prognosis is significantly better than we first believed. We're already seeing signs of awareness, subtle responses to familiar voices, particularly yours. And interestingly, she reacts to Dakota's presence." Robert exhaled, something other than fear settling in his chest for the first time in days. "So, she might wake up, be herself again?" Montgomery's expression remained carefully neutral. "Recovery from this kind of event is never simple. Sophie will face challenges, motor deficits, speech difficulties, possible cognitive impairment. She'll need extensive therapy and time," Dr. Montgomery continued. "Rehabilitation will be challenging, but yes, I believe Sophie has the potential for meaningful recovery. Given her age and the remarkable neuroplasticity of a developing brain, there's hope." As she detailed therapy options and next steps, Jake Morgan shifted in the doorway. Through the small window, he spotted a man in a business suit speaking with a hospital administrator. The man's occasional glances toward Sophie's room and the way he clutched a leather portfolio like a shield triggered Jake's instincts. Something about the man's practiced solemnity set off alarms. "Excuse me," Jake interrupted, keeping his voice polite but firm. "There's someone in the hallway taking an interest in this room. Security issue." Montgomery followed his gaze, her expression tightening. "That's not security. That's Gerald Whitman, the hospital's legal counsel." She turned back to Robert. "Mr. Taylor, I need to inform you that Riverus General has contacted our administration regarding Sophie's case. They formally requested access to her diagnostic findings and treatment records." Robert's brief hope curdled into anger. "They're worried about liability, about covering for Peterson's mistake." Montgomery's tone remained careful. "Legally, they're entitled to request information relevant to a patient transferred from their facility. However, as Sophie's father and legal guardian, you have significant control over what is shared and how it's used." Before Robert could respond, his phone vibrated, an unfamiliar local number. He excused himself and stepped into the corridor, brushing past Whitman with a curt nod before answering. "Mr. Taylor, this is Amanda Reeves from the Rivercrest Chronicle," a brisk female voice announced. "I'm calling regarding your daughters, Situation. We've received information about potential medical negligence at Riverist General. Would you care to comment? Robert stiffened. How did you get this number? How do you even know about my daughter's case? We have sources. Within the hospital system, Reeves replied, professional but not unsympathetic. Mr. Taylor, this story is going to break, with or without your input. Dr. Peterson has been involved in similar controversies before. Our research suggests a pattern of negligent treatment, particularly with patients who have complex conditions or insurance complications. Robert's grip tightened on the phone. Without another word, he ended the call. His pulse pounded as he returned to Sophie's room, where Jake and Dr. Montgomery were in quiet discussion, both looking grave. The hospital lawyer wants to speak with you, Jake said. I told him to go through proper channels instead. Lurking in hallways. Dr. Montgomery closed Sophie's file with deliberate care. Mr. Taylor, we've also received inquiries from multiple news outlets. Patient confidentiality prevents us from sharing anything without your explicit consent. But you should prepare for media attention. Robert exhaled sharply. It's already spreading. He relayed the call from the Chronicle reporter. Who's leaking this? Who would violate medical confidentiality? Jake's expression darkened. Someone with an agenda. Someone who knows Peterson's history and wants it exposed. As if on cue, a hospital administrator appeared in the doorway, looking apologetic. Dr. Montgomery, there's an urgent situation. The Riverist General representatives are demanding an immediate meeting with their legal team. Montgomery sighed, clearly reluctant. I'll return as soon as possible. In the meantime, Mr. Taylor, I recommend limiting visitors to family only. I've already instructed the nursing staff to redirect any unauthorized individuals, especially journalists. After she left, Robert sank into the chair beside Sophie's bed, exhaustion pressing down on him. Dakota, resting in the corner, rose and pressed his head against Robert's knee, a silent offer of comfort. This is turning into a circus, Robert muttered. Sophie needs peace, not media battles and legal fights. Jake hesitated, then said, there's something you should know, something about Peterson, and why this might be escalating so fast. He stepped forward, quietly closing the door before continuing. After I was arrested for breaking Peterson's nose, Jake said, a nurse, Caroline Mills, contacted my public defender. She wanted to testify about Peterson's history of substandard care. She had documentation, incident reports she'd filed, questionable patient outcomes. Robert sat up straighter. What happened? Nothing, Jake said, his voice edged with old anger. 2 days before my hearing, she withdrew her offer to testify. Took a job in Oregon. My lawyer tried to subpoena her, but suddenly the trial date was moved up. It all happened too fast. Robert's gut twisted. You think someone at Riverist pressured her to leave? Jake nodded. The hospital has new administrators now. Maybe someone found Mills's old reports. Maybe Peterson has made other mistakes that were covered up. Whatever the reason, Sophie's case is forcing something into the open. Before Robert could respond, a soft knock at the door interrupted them. A young nurse entered, checking Sophie's vitals with practiced efficiency. Dr. Montgomery asked me to let you know she's delayed in the meeting, the nurse said. Then, more hesitantly, she added, also, there's a police officer in the waiting area. He's asking for Mr. Morgan, says it's about a parole violation. Jake's face remained impassive, but his shoulders tensed. I should deal with this. Been expecting it since the funeral. Before he could move, Dakota suddenly lifted his head from Robert's knee, ears pricked. His focus snapped to Sophie, and a soft whine escaped. A familiar pattern. Get Dr. Montgomery, Robert ordered the nurse. Now, Dakota's alerting. The nurse moved toward the door but hesitated at a sudden sound from the bed. A faint moan, barely audible over the monitor's hum. Robert turned sharply. Sophie's eyelids fluttered. Her fingers twitched against the crisp hospital sheets. Sophie, he whispered, afraid to trust what he was seeing. Sweetheart, can you hear me? Her eyes opened, unfocused at first, then slowly locking onto his face. Recognition flickered. Her lips moved. Though no sound emerged, the shape of the word was unmistakable. Dakota. The room erupted into motion. The nurse called for assistance. Dakota's alert whine turned to an excited wiggle, though he remained at her side. Jake stepped back, his own troubles momentarily forgotten. Minutes later, Dr. Montgomery arrived, slightly breathless. She conducted a rapid neurological exam, testing Sophie's responses. When she finally stepped back, her professional demeanor faltered, genuine amazement slipping through. "This is remarkable," she told Robert. "Sophie is demonstrating purposeful responses and clear recognition. She's not fully conscious in the traditional sense, but she's significantly more responsive than we thought possible at this stage." Robert swallowed hard. "Why now?" "What changed?" Montgomery's gaze flicked to Dakota. The shepherd had settled into his watchful position beside Sophie, calm but alert. "I can't explain it medically," Montgomery admitted. "The brain's recovery isn't fully predictable, but over my career, I've learned not to dismiss factors outside our understanding, including the profound impact of emotional connections." As the medical team worked, Jake stepped into the corridor, bracing himself. Officer Miller, a junior, member of the Riverist Police, was waiting. The department seemed unusually at ease with his assignment. "Chief Wilson sent me," Miller explained in a low voice. "He wanted you to know that Judge Gardner has reviewed your case. Given the unusual circumstances, she's issued a temporary stay on the parole violation warrant, pending a review of new evidence regarding your intervention at the funeral." Jake's expression remained unreadable, but the tension in his posture eased. "Evidence?" he asked. Miller nodded. "Video from multiple sources confirming that your actions were medically appropriate and that you saved a child's life." A hint of a smile played at the corners of his lips. "Chief said to remind you that the legal wheels turn slowly, but sometimes they turn the right way." As Miller departed, Jake returned to find the atmosphere in the room utterly changed. The weight of administrative concerns had momentarily lifted, replaced by something far more profound, the miracle of Sophie's awakening. Robert sat beside her bed, tears running unchecked down his face as he spoke softly to his daughter, recounting Dakota's steadfastness at the funeral. "He knew, Sophie," Robert whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "When everyone else thought you were gone, Dakota knew you were still here. He wouldn't leave you." Sophie's fingers twitched in response. Slowly, her gaze shifted from her father to the German shepherd watching her intently. Her lips moved though no sound emerged. The shape was unmistakable. "Good boy." At that moment, as medical staff documented her vital signs, as legal questions remained unanswered in distant administrative offices, and as reporters gathered in the hospital lobby chasing extraordinary rumors, one truth crystallized. The bond between this child and her canine protector had defied medical understanding, institutional policies, and even the assumed limits between life and death itself. The seasons turned as Sophie Taylor's recovery progressed. Spring blossoms gave way to summer's heat, then to the rich hues of autumn in the Appalachian foothills. The journey was neither swift nor straightforward, marked by setbacks and breakthroughs that tested the resilience of everyone involved. Through it all, Dakota remained a constant presence, his alerting abilities now an integral part of Sophie's medical care plan. 6 months after what Rivercrest had come to call the miracle at Green Haven, Sophie sat in her wheelchair on the back deck of the Taylor home, bundled against November's chill. With painstaking determination, she worked through speech therapy exercises. Her progress had defied initial prognoses. Though she still struggled with fine motor coordination and complex speech, her cognitive functions had largely returned, preserved, as Dr. Montgomery described it, by a rare and perfect neurological storm of protective factors. "That's excellent, Sophie," encouraged Melissa Chin, the speech therapist who visited 3 times a week. "Let's try that sentence again." Sophie, focused. Dakota saved me. Each word required conscious effort, but they emerged with growing clarity. He knew. I was still here, resting beside her wheelchair in his working vest, Dakota lifted his head at the sound of his name, ever attentive. The shepherd had adjusted seamlessly to his dual role, continuing limited K-9 duties with the Rivercrest Police Department, while serving as Sophie's full-time medical alert companion. The arrangement had become a model program, with Chief Wilson showcasing it to other departments across the state. Inside the house, Robert Taylor sat at the kitchen table with Jake Morgan and Sarah Williams from the Animal Sanctuary, reviewing the paperwork before them. The legal and medical aftermath of Sophie's case had played out dramatically over the past months, culminating in today's development. The settlement agreement includes a non-disclosure clause regarding the specific terms the Taylor family's attorney had explained earlier that morning. However, it ensures full coverage of Sophie's past and future medical expenses, rehabilitation costs, and educational accommodations through college. Additionally, Rivercrest General had agreed to implement major protocol reforms for patients with complex neurological conditions. What didn't need to be said was that the hospital's eagerness to settle stemmed from the extensive investigation Sophie's case had triggered. Dr. Peterson had been placed on administrative leave, his record now under review for a troubling pattern of rushed diagnoses and inadequate care. Caroline Mills, the nurse who had attempted to report these issues years earlier, had provided sworn testimony from her new position in Oregon, vindicated at last by the institutional changes now taking effect. The foundation paperwork is almost finalized, Sarah explained, flipping through a folder of legal documents. Once the 501c3 status is approved, Sophie's Angels can begin formal operations. We already have commitments from 3 regional hospitals to participate in the Medical Alert Dog Training Program. The foundation had been Robert's idea, born from long nights at Sophie's hospital bedside. Sophie's Angels would train rescue dogs as medical alert companions for children with neurological conditions, while also educating medical facilities on integrating service animals into patient care. The settlement had provided the initial funding, with several pharmaceutical companies offering ongoing financial support, eager for the positive publicity. And the training facility renovations at the sanctuary are ahead of schedule, Sarah added. We should be ready to start the pilot program with the first families by February. Jake nodded, making notes on his tablet. His legal uncertainty now behind him, Judge Gardner had officially dismissed the parole violation charges, citing extraordinary public service and heroic intervention. Now employed as the Foundation's operations director, Jake had found purpose, combining his medical background with his growing skills in program development and advocacy. Chief Wilson called this morning, he said, scrolling through his notes. The department approved Dakota's reduced schedule, 20 hours monthly, mostly for community outreach and special events. That leaves him available for the training program demonstrations. Their conversation paused as the back door opened, revealing Sophie in her wheelchair, pushed by Melissa. Dakota followed attentively, his alert stance relaxed but ever vigilant. She did wonderfully today, Melissa reported, gathering her materials. Speech clarity is improving, and sentence complexity is increasing. Exactly what Dr. Montgomery predicted. After Melissa's departure, the family settled in the living room, where adaptations had been made for Sophie's ongoing recovery. The space reflected their new reality. Medical equipment discreetly integrated alongside family photographs. Therapy schedules pinned beside Sophie's artwork. Dakota's specialized gear stored neatly in a custom cabinet. I have something for you, Robert said, retrieving a small box from his desk. It arrived this morning. Sophie opened it carefully, her movements deliberate but increasingly steady after months of occupational therapy. Inside lay a custom-made medallion attached to a blue ribbon, engraved with Dakota's name and the words, Extraordinary Service, Beyond Duty. The governor will present it officially at next month's ceremony, Robert explained, but they sent this replica for you to keep. A smile broke across Sophie's face, more natural now than the strained expressions of early recovery. Dakota deserves it, she said carefully. He didn't give up. No one needed to say what they all felt. They had learned a truth, far deeper than words, that bonds forged in loyalty and love transcended logic. that second chances sometimes arrived in unexpected ways. That evening, after Sophie was settled for the night, Dakota maintaining his customary place beside her bed, Robert and Jake sat on the back deck, watching the stars emerge in the crisp November sky. "Jennifer would be proud," Robert said quietly, breaking the companionable silence. "Of Sophie, of you, of the foundation." Jake nodded, emotion still unfamiliar terrain after years spent avoiding it. "She always saw the best in people," he admitted. "Even in me, when I couldn't see it myself." "Sophie has that same quality," Robert observed. "The ability to recognize something valuable in the overlooked and broken." They both knew he wasn't just talking about Dakota. The following morning brought the first light of a new day. The first snowfall of the season blanketed River Crest in pristine white. Sophie insisted on bundling up for a brief excursion to the backyard, where Dakota bounded joyfully through the untouched drifts while she directed the scene from her wheelchair. "Look, Daddy," she called, pointing toward the tracks Dakota had left behind. "He's making a heart." Robert watched as the German Shepherd circled back, his path indeed forming a shape that resembled a heart around Sophie's wheelchair. Whether by chance or instinct hardly mattered. The symbolism was perfect. As Dakota returned to her side, pressing his warm body against her wheelchair in quiet devotion, Robert captured the moment with his camera. Soon, the image would grace the homepage of the Sophie's Angels Foundation website, becoming the emblem of their mission. A girl once declared lost, a dog once discarded, and the extraordinary bond that had saved them both. Their story would spread far beyond River Crest, inspiring similar programs across the country and eventually around the world. Yet the most powerful element wasn't the medical miracle or the dramatic rescue. It was the simple, profound truth Dakota had understood when all human expertise had failed. Sometimes the faintest heartbeat is strong enough to sustain the eye. Greatest love. In a world that often dismisses intuition in favor of data, Sophie's story reminds us that not all truths can be measured by machines or degrees. Dakota, a creature many would overlook, recognized what highly trained professionals could not. Just as this loyal shepherd refused to abandon Sophie, so too must we honor the unspoken bonds that carry us through our darkest moments. With time and experience, we come to understand something about loyalty and perseverance that younger generations are still learning. Love doesn't always arrive in expected forms or speak in familiar languages. Sometimes, it comes with forepaws and unwavering devotion. Sometimes, it appears as the second chances we never thought possible. Sophie's journey teaches us that, even when all logic says to give up, when science declares defeat, something miraculous can still happen, if we simply refuse to walk away. The faintest heartbeat can indeed sustain the greatest love. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below with your thoughts. I'd love to hear them. See you in the next video.